Welcome, everyone. It is 2:01, depending on where you're calling in from. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the fourth meeting on the crisis of missing or murdered American Indians or Alaska Natives. For those of you who have not attended one of these sessions before, my name is Lisa Mantell, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Police Executive Research Forum, Deputy Director of Technical Assistance, excuse me. This meeting is being recorded, as you heard the announcement, and we do plan to share the video and audio as well as a transcript on the Operation Lady Justice website in the near future. I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So we'll do a brief overview on logistics. Many of us I know are familiar with Zoom, but just a few reminders. For the best audio quality, we do ask that you stay on mute unless you're speaking. We will have questions, time for questions and discussions later on during this session. And when that time comes, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. You're also able to ask a question in the chat box. If you hover either at the top of your screen or the bottom of the screen, you should see some icons, and there you'll see a chat box where you can raise your hand and type a question into the chat. If you run into any technical issues with your audio or your video, try leaving the meeting and then re-entering. I've also added the call-in information to the chat window for folks who want to dial in by phone instead of computer. And now we'll turn to introductions. As I mentioned, my name is Lisa Mantell with PERF. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Matt Lizakowski, Senior Advisor for Tribal Affairs for the Office of Community Oriented Policing Services, or as most of you know us by, the COPS Office here in the U.S. Department of Justice. Welcome,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you. Marsha?
Hello, everybody. This is Marsha Good. I'm the Executive Director of Operation Lady Justice and work with Matt and Ernie and a number of the other panelists here.
Thank you. And Monty?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monty Gibson. I am the Associate Director of the Division of Field Operations for BIA Law Enforcement, and I oversee 5 national public safety programs within the BIA, and one of those programs is the Missing and Murdered Unit. So welcome.
Thank you. Ernie?
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ernie Wyand. I am the MMIP coordinator for the District of Montana. I'm also a retired FBI agent who served nearly 2 decades working with and in tribal communities.
Thanks, Ernie. And Ingrid?
Hello and welcome again. My name is Ingrid Cumberledge. I'm Elliott and Plinkett from Alaska, and I am the MMIP coordinator in the U.S. Attorneys here in the District of Alaska in Anchorage.
Thank you. And now I'm just going to go down the participant list. I'll go in the order that it's presented on my screen. So when I call your name, please introduce yourself and say what agency you represent. We'll start with someone who's just calling in on the phone. The number is 505-699-3628.
Yes, good morning, Joseph Lovato, Santa Clara Pueblo Tribal Police Department, Chief of Police.
Thank you, Joseph Lovato. Alejandro Benali.
Hi, good morning from Arizona. This is one of my first, this is actually the first teleconference I've been participating in, so I got the invite. The Chief of Police with the San Carlos Apache Police Department in Arizona, which is District 3 for the BIA area. And I'm glad to be on here. I'm actually on the road right now, so I'm not be able to answer a lot of questions if there's any. So,
Okay.
but I'll definitely stay on.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Chris Parsons.
Good morning. Chris Parsons, Chief of Police for the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe in northern Nevada, just outside of Reno, Nevada.
Thank you. Elton Bigay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Elton Begay. I am the Chief of Police with the Tohono O'odham Nation Tribal Police in Southern Arizona with the U.S.-Mexico border. I also a part of a community member with the Arizona State Committee for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. So definitely, this is one of my many meetings that I enjoy listening and sharing information to my co-partners when I get back to my government and share all the good information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person, Hal Hutchinson.
Hi, I'm Hal Hutchinson. I'm the Chief of Police of Archer Tribal Police. We are located in South Central Louisiana, down by the coast.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Hutchinson. It was a little difficult to hear you. Hopefully we'll get that straightened out. Hyla Jacobson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hyla Jacobson, and I'm a research assistant at the Police Executive Research Forum.
Thank you, Hyla. Next up is James West.
Yep, James West with Mille Lacs Band Tribal Police, located in central Minnesota.
Thank you, welcome. Jasper Bruner.
Jasper Bruner with Nebe Public Safety for the Makah Tribe in Nebe, Washington.
Thank you very much. Cecilia Nez.
Good afternoon. I am Fifilia Nez. I'm First Lady of the Navajo Nation. I also represent the Navajo Nation on the New Mexico MMIW Task Force.
Thank you. Welcome. William Denke.
Good day, everyone. Chief of Police for the Sycuan Band of the Kumeyaay Nation in Southern California.
Thank you. And that looks like everybody on my list. If there's anybody I didn't call, please go ahead and speak up now. I believe I got everybody on the list, or I'm not sure if there were any late additions to the call. It looks like that's everybody. Okay. Matt, I'll turn it over to you to discuss today's agenda.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks again for all those joining us today. Good to see some familiar faces and names, and also some new folks joining us. So appreciate everyone taking the time to join us for this is our fourth and final session for this year that the COPS office is sponsoring on MMIP. And for this session, what we're going to do is take sort of a panel presentation type of format and talk about tribal community response plans. We're benefited by having two of the MMIP coordinators, Ernie and Ingrid, on the call. And then we're also going to talk MMIP policies and procedures with Monty from BIA. So what we're going to do is I'm going to facilitate the session, and I'll throw out some questions to get the discussion started, but I do want to encourage everyone in attendance to ask questions kind of throughout. I'm going to pause after the first few questions and give an opportunity for all of you to ask questions of Ernie, Ingrid, and Monty. And that's how we're going to kind of proceed through our session today. And then if we have time at the end, we'll open up for any kind of general Q&A as well, or any other topics you want to discuss related to MMIP. So Lisa, do we have one more slide?
I think that's it. Oh, we do have one more, just an overview. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so just a quick recap of our sessions that we've had thus far. We did one in January, March, and May of this year. We focused originally on general updates to Operation Lady Justice and the MMIP initiative. We did a session on training opportunities and alerting authorities in March. And then our last one in May, before the summer break, was on technical assistance opportunities and the volunteer engagement program that the COPS office is helping develop that may be able to assist in missing cases. So again, today we're going to focus on the tribal community response plans that have been developed and MMIP policies and procedures. So with that, Lisa, if you want to stop sharing, I think we can, it'll be best to keep us in sort of the video feedback perspective here so that we can see Ingrid and Monty and Ernie when they weigh in here. And I want to throw out the first question to Ernie and Ingrid. The DOJ initiative and Operation Lady Justice call for the development of model protocols and procedures to address missing person cases involving American Indians and Alaska Natives. And could you tell us a little bit about how the Tribal Community Response Plan evolved from this initial requirement from Operation Lady Justice and the MMIP initiative?
5:30, 5:20, dude. That's what I was like. I got to freaking.
Just a reminder for everyone to stay muted throughout the call if you're not speaking. So Ernie or Ingrid, if you want to jump in with your first comments there, that would be great.
Ingrid, I'll certainly defer to you if you'd like to go first.
Well, as the protocols and procedures happened, we of course were working with Operation Lady Justice and involved with working groups, and that, you know, that developed into the guides, which really guided the Tribal Community Response Plan. And those guides were in community outreach, media, and public response, victim services, law enforcement, and the Tribal Community Response Plan. But at the same time in Alaska, we were involved with a working group because Alaska was so large and we had 229 tribes, and of course we were in COVID. So trying to figure out how we were going to get to tribal community response plans that would work across Alaska and would also touch on those guides and whatnot, really meant that we had to bring the stakeholders to the table. And so we developed a working group way back in August. I really pushed them because at that point we were being told, you know, by November of 2020 that we had to have it done. And so we were meeting every week to talk about these guides as they were in development at the Operation Lady Justice part of things. And we had federal law enforcement, state law enforcement, tribal law enforcement, municipal law enforcement at the table. We had victim services at the table. And then we had some tribal representatives across the state that were at this working group. And about a month in, they said, this is just too much. And so we've changed to bi-weekly meetings, and we've kept those going all the way along. And then by October, we were inviting tribes to come to the table and start doing their tribal community response plans. So we had the Alaska Federation of Natives, which is an annual conference that all the tribes participate in. And we reached out to them then. We also reached out to them in email and text and said, hey, come. And we did get some volunteers to participate in that process. And I think we'll talk more about that process as we move on. So I'm going to turn it over to Ernie and he can fill in the blanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Ingrid. And once again, as Matt mentioned, I see many familiar faces and many familiar names in this forum, and I thank you. And I'll talk specifically about your contributions, but I'm going to step back a little bit and talk a little more maybe about the kind of the history and the evolution of how we went from this idea of developing kind of model protocols and procedures to respond to emergent missing persons cases in tribal communities, and how it eventually evolved into what is the Tribal Community Response Plan. And as you know, as I think most of you participating in this forum know, that in November of 2019, Department of Justice announced its initiative to address MMIP matters, specifically dealing with emergent missing persons cases, long-term unresolved missing persons cases and unresolved homicides involving Native Americans. One of the, with this announcement, a few days later came the announcement in the executive order that ultimately created Operation Lady Justice. And really since that time, we've been working very closely in trying to really determine, what our requirements are and how do we kind of achieve these requirements. And one of the specific kind of requirements in jobs that we had was to develop model protocols and procedures as it relates to missing persons and how a community can most effectively and efficiently address this issue when somebody goes missing. So initially we developed the working groups at a national level and really tried to look at developing a model protocol and procedure for law enforcement agency response when somebody goes missing. And we brought together representatives from various components of Department of Justice, from the FBI, from the BIA, Office of Justice Services, from the U.S. Marshal Service. We had consultations by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and we had other groups that we were asking to come in and provide input and feedback as we were looking to develop this kind of common national response protocol. This went on for several months, and ultimately we did kind of develop a protocol that was, I think, really well done in terms of how a law enforcement agency effectively responds to a report of a missing emergent missing persons case. At the same time this was going on, we were engaged in conversations both kind of locally and nationally with tribal leaders, tribal law enforcement officials, community members, key stakeholders from tribal communities in looking at this issue and this problem. One of the things that was common in all our discussions, whether local or national, was that tribal communities didn't want a national protocol kind of dropped on them with the expectation that that would be effective in addressing missing emergent missing persons cases impacting their communities, that they wanted a more customized response. They wanted a response that was multidisciplinary in makeup, and they wanted a response that took into consideration the needs of their community, their resources that they could draw from within and from nearby, from the outside, and also the specific culture of their community. So with that, we started to hear more and more references in various meetings about the need for a community response plan or overall community response in addressing missing persons cases specifically, and really, addressing the issue that was and issues that were driving these cases in their communities. Which really is ultimately hearing that is, the right answer. Understanding that a law enforcement agency response really is just maybe one small part of an effective and efficient response when somebody goes missing, and addressing those cases of why people go missing, or addressing them on the back end, that once an individual is maybe recovered and returned home, that maybe they don't go missing again. So with that, we kind of evolved. We pivoted from this creation of a national protocol that would be more or less issued to tribal law enforcement to this tribal community response plan. And again, as Ingrid mentioned, what we looked at, and again, from input from individuals like you on this, participating in this forum, I see many names of chiefs of police that participated in the discussions when we were talking about what was most important to address in law enforcement agency response and what was needed in terms of other things related to communicating with community members and so on. So ultimately, we determined that really we needed to look at kind of 4 specific areas in order to, really address this tribal community response. And those areas, as Ingrid mentioned, are effective law enforcement agency response, effective and timely integration of culturally appropriate victim support services, effective media and public communications, communication to tribal leadership, communicating to the tribal community as a whole. And then the final part was, and I think more and more as I've worked on these tribal community response plans, is the missing ingredient. That is the effective incorporation of community-based resources and community-based organizational or community-based organization involvement and input into what's taking place. So that's ultimately what has become the tribal community response plan, is looking at these 4 areas, working with tribes to develop their policies and capacity in these 4 areas, and ensuring kind of the effective collaboration and integration of these 4 different components: law enforcement response, victim services, media and public communication, and community-based resources. We think ultimately with this ensures the most kind of effective utilization of resources that are available. It is a ground-up approach that tribes are looking kind of inward for resourcing, for response, for kind of the critical components of what's needed in order to be most effective. And certainly, considering these integration of specialized resources, the FBI and others. But that is how the tribal community response plans kind of came about as a result of that kind of, requirement to develop kind of model protocols or procedures. I will say that all the work that initially went into developing this national protocol didn't go to waste, because ultimately the BIA, Office of Justice Services, have used most of that work to develop their current and most recent policy relating to missing persons. And if you don't have that policy and you're a tribal law enforcement agency, it is really well done. It's dated February of this year. It's very detailed. They also recently put out kind of a pocket guide that takes their 40-page policy down to, I think, 11 pages, but it is really, really well done. So I'll put that out there and promote that for you. And certainly if you need a copy, you have Monty Gibson that's participating in this forum, and certainly I could help you as well. My email contact is in the chat. So Matt, thank you. That probably a really long-winded explanation of that first part.
No, I think it's important to have that background for everyone to understand how we got to the tribal community response plan strategy. And Ernie, both you and Ingrid have already sort of alluded to the next question I want to ask, which is how you develop the tribal community response plans in your areas. And I'll make it a 2-parter and say also who you specifically engaged with to develop the plans. Both of you have experience now developing these plans with tribes in your areas. And so maybe just talk a little bit about 1 or 2 of those experiences and how you went about doing it, and who you engaged with throughout the process.
Bernie's being quiet, so I'll start again.
Perfect. Thanks, Ingrid.
Thank you, Matt. We had quite a job. I came on in July of 2020. Ernie had started in November of 2019, and so I was playing catch up, and I was so glad that he was there to kind of lead and guide the way. And we were looking at Alaska, and of course there was 229 tribes across 663,000 square miles, and reaching, if you put it across the United States, it would reach from north to south and east to west on the map superimposed. So 1/5 of the continental US and area, and most of them we couldn't reach unless we were on a small commuter plane or by boat. In the wintertime, maybe snow machine. And so, and also COVID was happening, so they said, we want you to meet with everybody. We want to get you together with all the tribes. We want to get you together with all the law enforcement. But could you go home and work from home and don't meet with anybody directly? And I had participated in a process that allowed me to meet with big groups previously with the Millennium Agreement. And I knew how you could do that in person, but that would have required budget and not COVID. And so we did it by doing a teleconference network. And we invited very specifically. So we invited the federal partners that were actively responding, the U.S. Marshals, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the BIA, which was the cold case unit at that time, the MMU unit now. The Coast Guard joined us of their own, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, of course, from me. And in the state of Alaska, we're a PL 280 state, so it was really important that we have the Alaska State Troopers, and they have come in force. They brought their search and rescue, as well as their investigative portion, and have been a partner all the way through. We had participated in a COPS listening session and found a state trooper that was pretty active, as well as a couple of VPSO supervisors, or village public safety officers, and recruited them to participate because they were obviously interested and had some good feedback in that section. And then we got a couple of victim services and advocates that were involved. One was the tribal based and one that was not. And some tribal representatives across the state. And we just brought those guys together to have the conversation about how we would do this. And really, it came down to finding out what was going on at the national level and looking at those best practices and those areas that Ernie and I both discussed, and really talking about how we would come up with these models. And in Alaska, that meant looking at communities with no law enforcement, because we have 80 of the 229 that have no law enforcement. And then another large group that often doesn't have law enforcement because they're changing personnel. And then we have a few that have hub communities that have municipal law enforcement, as well as Alaska State Troopers. And so we decided as a group that we would look at 3 different models of tribal community response plans that fit those scenarios. And we just went out. We went out on email, we went out on phone. Like I said, we went to the Alaska Federation of Natives and said, hey, we're looking for some tribes that want to get involved. And we had 4 tribes that actually volunteered. 3 really fit the models well. The group accepted those 3. And they have stayed involved and joined the working group as we went through the process throughout the deal. And then we went out to them, and in setting these up and developing them, we took the whole working group via Zoom, because again, we're still in COVID, villages were really protective. And we took them out to those communities and said, okay, we're going to meet with you for 5 days. The first day is yours, the last day is yours, but those in-between days, we're going to look at these models, that the best practices that were coming out of Operation Lady Justice with the guides, and really want you to assess what you have, how you're responding already, and how you can be supported by all these members that are at the table. And they did a fantastic job. I have to say, Zoom is incredibly exhausting. And so they did it for 5 days, all of them, and they met for 5 hours a day. We had to make sure we had breaks. We had to make sure that we were taking care of their health and mental health needs as we went through the day. Throughout the process, they identified goals and objectives, and their goals were really, we do not want this language in 7 generations. We really do not want to have missing and murdered as a problem in rural Alaska in the future. And so they really took control of what they had control of, and they looked at prevention and intervention issues on historical trauma issues. So they looked at things, domestic violence and sexual assault. They looked at substance and alcohol abuse, and where the people were getting displaced, which often involved travel or social media and social gaming. And they really figured out what they could do with those. So they involved many people at the table, not just from the village, but they involved their social services providers, they involved their churches, they involved their law enforcement locally, they involved their corporate shareholder affairs person, they involved their shelters, which some of them were in the villages, some of them were not, but were often their domestic violence and sexual assault providers, their victim services providers. And then they invited their Alaska State Troopers that were servicing the area to come and be a part of that process, and the victim services that were closest to that. And they also brought in the media, and I have to say the media was one of the best interactions, because they really just flat out told media, they said, hey, we don't like what you're doing. We don't like that when you report and Sally from the school goes missing, you said, the headline reads, Sally is missing, we got to go save her. And when Ingrid was missing and she's Alaska Native, the headline reads, oh, maybe she was drinking and she might have a history with law enforcement. And somewhere down in the story, we say, oh, she's missing and we might need help. And the media responded. The media has, from the reports that I've gotten from the community, has changed not only how they report on missing issues, but also how they report on all issues. And the Alaska State Troopers stepped up and said, hey, you know, part of this is our release of information. We check a box, and the box says, we will, I apologize, this is on my computer and I don't really know how to shut it off, so it doesn't do that. So we report that substance abuse was involved. But by the time we got through the week, we were writing through the week based on those guides, and they wrote what they wanted for best practices for law enforcement. They worked with law enforcement on that issue. They wrote in victim services as a need. They wrote in all of the guides were included in their process, and then we have revisited ever since. So 2 of them have adopted, 1 of them is still a work in progress. And we continue to revisit because they identified it as a work in progress. So 1 of them has it on their monthly agenda for the tribal council, and they're just keeping it there. And the other one has set quarterly reviews, and that's kind of how it developed, and it continues to develop, because now all of those folks have gone out to regional listening and consultation sessions to invite other tribes to be involved and to educate other tribes about the process. Ernie, thank you, Matt.
All right, thanks, Ingrid. And I can say now, I've had the chance, I've been working with tribes in Montana. I've had a chance now to meet with all 7 reservations. The only tribe I haven't met is our newest tribe here in Montana, the Little Shell. And the Little Shell is still kind of figuring out its land and other things. And but I can tell you that the experience for each has been very different. I think it's important to note with the Tribal Community Response Plan, we've been very cognizant of the fact that this is the tribe's plan. So my role really has been a facilitator, an advisor, assisting the tribes as they kind of evaluate their specific needs relating to their law enforcement agency response, their integration of victim services, their needs and capacity for communications, and also, again, this important element of integrating community-based organizations. The process is generally, and it's varied in length, depending on the tribe. It's varied, obviously, in kind of maybe the groups that are participating, but in general, the way that we've kind of gone through this process is we have very early on done some pre-work. We've identified, I think it's important to know that at least in the work that I've done in Montana, the involvement and the endorsement by tribal leadership has been huge. So in every case, we've met with tribal leadership. We've explained to them what the tribal community response plan is, and very realistic expectations of what we could deliver by working with them on developing a tribal community response plan. In every case, it's been well received. We've gotten lots of questions by tribal leaders, but ultimately we've gotten very strong endorsement, in many cases participation by tribal leadership. Many of the folks who were involved in our working groups with the first tribe I worked with the first reservation, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, involved a number of tribal leaders who are involved in all the working groups and involved in kind of moving things forward. With other kind of reservations I've worked with, it's been different. Different levels of participation, but in every case, we've had strong endorsements by tribal leadership. We've had them kind of promoting this work, and which has, I think, really leveraged the engagement by the various groups we've worked with in these communities. So that was the first step, getting tribal leadership kind of involved on board, understanding kind of what we were doing, and truly what they could expect by our involvement. Understanding again that it is their plan. Like I said, I play the role as a facilitator and advisor, and insist basically in any capacity I can that they want me to assist. But again, I emphasize that it is in fact their plan. Generally, what we've done from that point is tribes have identified kind of key stakeholders and developed working groups, or identified and put together working groups to address the law enforcement agency response portion. Same with victim services, same with media, and same with community-based organizations. In my view, for the tribal community response plan, the foundational piece is law enforcement agency response. That doesn't mean, and shouldn't be confused with, this is a law enforcement issue. But certainly I think in terms of the response when somebody goes missing, that's the foundational component of the plan. So I typically worked with the working groups around developing that effective law enforcement agency response first. And specifically worked with the tribal law enforcement, or the BIA law enforcement specifically in the beginning, to look at their existing policies, if they had a policy, if they didn't have a policy. With that, we would examine the policy, we'd examine tribal statutes, we'd examine basically any materials or information they had that related to or impacted their response when somebody went missing. We would look at, evaluate these, use the guides, and ultimately determine if there were specific gaps that we identified, things that could make their planned response stronger. We also had an eye, as we looked at these policies, of with these gaps, how could we integrate community-based organizations to address some of the gaps that we were finding. As you all know, there's no kind of policy or plan out there that is perfect, and many that are really far from perfect. And as we've exercised these plans, we've found where we had issues. But oftentimes I'd see with these working groups is they really never really had time, or, to kind of go back and address these issues and kind of address it in their plans. So we really kind of focused on that. And again, with law enforcement agency, we worked on, we worked specifically on looking at kind of their policies, their gaps, how we could improve. We would then look at how they were using victim support services, what specifically resources were available, whether they were systems-based, victim service providers, community-based, In the first case, we didn't have systems-based victim service providers at all. We had all community-based that were funded with, different caveats or different needs in order for them to be integrated into the response most effectively. So we identified kind of how we could do that. And the tribe really came up with some creative solutions with community-based organizations, how to fill those gaps in their victim services side. Again, we had working groups to, address the victim services side. We had working groups to address how do we effectively bring media in, that engagement with the media, ensuring that it promotes positively the investigation that's taking place. It takes into account the messaging and how that can impact victims and victims' families. We also, having common messaging between law enforcement agencies or agencies involved in these cases. As a little background with the first, with Confederated Salish and Cooney tribes on the Flathead Indian Reservation, they had 10 separate jurisdictions operating within the exterior boundary of that reservation. They had 4 separate county sheriff's office, 4 separate non-tribal police agencies. They had a tribal police department, and they had the state, Montana Highway Patrol and State Division of Criminal Investigation. So that's 10 jurisdictions, not including federal jurisdiction. Each jurisdiction had a different missing persons policy. Each jurisdiction had a different way that they communicated and handled missing persons cases. So we found significant things as we were kind of looking at that law enforcement agency response. And again, working groups to kind of look at each of these policies to find gaps. We had kind of overall coordination meetings that dealt with, kind of integrating all this. And maybe one of the most important meetings that we had is we had what we were calling extended law enforcement working groups. And this included all those outside agencies that were based in close proximity to the reservation, folks that were agencies that the reservation often was dealing with when somebody went missing. And it was one of those areas where, we always talk about, that there's these jurisdictional boundaries or hurdles that are out there, and they're impacting the work that we're doing. And we really talked through those issues. What were jurisdictional hurdles that needed to be addressed? I was referring to them as kind of friction points. And it was amazing, once again, the discussion that was taking place and the resolutions that we were coming up with just in the working group. Because again, in most of these meetings, when we'd have 10 or 11 agencies together, it was the first and only time they'd ever sat down as a collection of agencies and discussed this issue. And because of that, there were a number of things that we could resolve very quickly. And again, I think I told you, we had 10 separate missing persons policies. Within that first meeting, there was an agreement that they were going to one common policy. We had communications that weren't being distributed within agencies operating on the reservation bounding. So tribal member goes missing in Sanders County, and Flathead County or the tribal police department didn't necessarily know about it. So we addressed that very quickly. There were a number of other things in terms of communication that we addressed very quickly in those meetings. So again, it was all, through the kind of these working groups, and the working groups didn't take very long. They were generally set up, and we did a little pre-work before we got together, and we'd have our working group sessions would be a couple of hours at the most. And over a 2 or 3 day period, we would have the creation, really what we needed, certainly the framework of an effective tribal community response plan. And then it's the, kind of finalizing it by putting things in writing And testing that plan is a very important part. I know Ingrid in Alaska is now going to very soon be going through kind of tabletop exercises. But I do think that, that's a very important part as you're developing your tribal community response plan. Not only, having policies and protocols in those 4 areas and achieving those through working groups or however you choose, but once again, kind of exercising that plan once it's done. So, Matt, that's what I have.
Thanks, Ernie. Oh, go ahead, Ingrid.
Matt, I just want to echo a little bit from the law enforcement point of view. In Alaska, it was very obvious that in many of our communities, they had a misunderstanding of what jurisdiction was. And so it was really important, one, to build those relationships, to build those contacts, to really develop, on both sides. We had our municipality, the biggest municipality in Alaska, and Anchorage Police Department saying, hey, we're getting a lot of these village folks and they're going missing. And then we don't know who to reach out to get family information. So they needed tribal information. The Alaska State Troopers needed tribal information, and the tribes felt like they could call the FBI and the FBI would come over and take it over. They didn't, that there were steps. They didn't understand that the Alaska State Troopers generally had jurisdiction, or if there was a municipal police department that they generally had jurisdiction, and there were steps to get through that. So that law enforcement piece of developing those understandings was really, really important. And also all of our villages had search and rescue, and informally, for the most part, but building on that and making that more formal and developing those contacts. And the other thing that was happening across Alaska is we had cases that were being reported days, weeks, and months later. I had one reported to me this year that was, they believed the person went missing in February and they were reporting it in July. So they were not comfortable reporting to law enforcement, and building these relationships and having these discussions was incredibly important, because it just set a bunch of things in motion. Alaska State Troopers were able to get support to their search and rescue in the villages. They were able to begin to figure out how to mobilize and get into the village if they weren't located there. They were able to notify FBI and the marshals if there was any sort of federal nexus, or if they needed support in some of the investigation. They could notify them and put them on notice that was going to be coming. And all of that communication happened because of this tribal community response plan effort. And the tabletop, which is happening the beginning of October in the 2 communities that have approved, is just really another way of looking for where are the holes. Is this, what can we do to make this more effective and to work more effectively? So thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Ernie and Ingrid. It really seems like your approaches have been really aligned nicely with the community policing approach on engaging the community in the process, and then also those partnerships with other agencies, which are 2 of the main tenets of community policing. So it just kind of struck me as that you really sort of embrace that community policing approach in the development of the plans. Before I open it up to everyone for some questions, I want to engage Monty here for a minute. And Ernie, you had mentioned the MMIP policies that BIA has. And so Monty, I wanted to see if you could just talk for a couple of minutes about the BIA policies and procedures around MMIP that Ernie alluded to.
Sure. Yes, we do have developed some policies and standard operating procedures for our BIA missing and murdered unit. Originally, it was called the cold case unit, and they originally instituted some SOPs, but once earlier this year, within this, we changed it to missing and murdered. We solidified leadership, having a permanent unit chief in Marcelino Torsman, and also his supervisor agent. So we solidified leadership, and that was the first thing they started to develop was a standard operating procedure. So we have revised the original ones that are in draft, and they're in the process of being presented to headquarters for final review and approval. And once we get that approval, we'll implement it. These procedures are in line with the National Institute of Justice guide relating to cold case investigations. And we'll also, excuse me? Okay. There's just some feedback I'm catching. And we'll also include, we had to add the role of a dedicated victim specialist to our missing and murdered unit as well. But the SOPs will cover, just real quick to cover things of missing and murdered, identifying the cases to closure, case closures, case prioritization, the referral case review process, case development, everything that's in that process, which is a lot of screening, such thing as what evidence is there, what medical reports, the forensics, the victim services, the victimology, and so forth. We feel very good about these SOPs that are being reviewed. And prior to that, in our BIA OJS Law Enforcement Handbook back in February of 2021, we also implemented a policy just for missing persons protocol. We developed it, and I believe our OJS staff participated in the DOJ BIA working groups and got a lot of information, which prompted us to revise or develop. We didn't have one. When that's been developed in February of 2021. And that particular policy is for our law enforcement officers that respond to missing person reports, taking a report and also initiating the initial investigation of a missing person. There's things covered in there, for example, like, there's no time period of, how, some departments may wait 24 hours. We don't have those things. I mean, it specifically says that in there. There's no time period. The role of dispatch, the role of the supervisors, making sure that we enter all the data into NamUs, notify the FBI, and those type of things. So that policy is specifically for our handbook. And then, yes, we've also awaiting the SOPs for our missing and murdered unit.
Great, thanks, Monty. Appreciate you covering both the LE handbook and the MMU SOPs as well. Before I engage in any further questions, I want to give an opportunity here for anyone in the audience, the participants, to raise their hand and ask questions of Ingrid, Ernie, or Monty, and see if we have any questions from our participants before I continue my list of questions. So if anyone has any initial questions around the tribal community response plans or the LE handbook or MMU, feel free to jump in here. You can raise your hand in the Zoom platform, or you can type in your question in the chat feature. Want to try and engage folks here, so let's pause and see if anyone has any questions. And if you're having challenges with the raise hand feature, you can also just unmute yourself. We're a pretty small group here. So any initial questions for our panelists? It looks like Chief Danke, you may have your hand up.
Yes, just real quick. Actually, no questions, just a comment. I have to jump off the call in about 10 minutes, but it's really amazing the amount of work that's been done in such a relative short amount of time. So just hats off for the dedication that everybody's just put into this, everything that's been done. It's just really nice to see. It's nice to hear the passion from those folks that have been put in these positions and how seriously they've taken it. So just hats off and kudos. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate you joining us for all these sessions and your leadership as well, both with your agency and the IACP Indian Country section. I know you've got a full plate there, and appreciate you joining us for these as well. Anybody else have any other questions at the moment? I can continue down my list. If not, give folks one more minute here to jump in. I don't see any other hands at the moment, so let me engage Monty again with a clarifying point on the missing and murdered unit. You alluded to the unit. Can you tell us a little, just explain to everyone, sort of what the unit is and what it looks like in size and scope?
Sure. The unit is comprised of federal agents and support staff, which include an analyst and the addition of a victim specialist to investigate missing persons and unsolved murder cases where our unit has jurisdiction, or in Indian Country, that's our jurisdiction. Currently, there are 11 active federal agents that are in place, and we have an additional 9 agent positions that are being recruited for, that are in the HR process. So overall, once we fill all the positions, there will be 20 federal agents located at 17 specific locations around the country. Originally, there was only 10 agents allocated for the cold case unit. And earlier, mid-year in this year, 2020, OJS made a commitment to add additional 10 agents. So that's how we've come up with the 20 agents today. The investigations are being commenced on cases identified to be solvable. And also our records, we have to, a lot of the investigative records reviewing referrals and things are archived, sorry. So, we've been hindered a little bit in getting some of those records from archive due to COVID. However, our efforts are currently being made to get those records so we can continue to review a lot of the historical referrals that have come in. In respects to records from other departments, though, when the agents do get referrals and we are screening cases, this is ongoing. It's a tedious process when you review historical referrals, but we've made a lot of progress, I would say, in the last 5 months and working with outside agencies, getting reports, getting medical records, getting evidence, lab reports, and those type of things. That's all needed to determine our solvability so we can proceed with some investigations. But overall, that's where the unit stands right now. And the scope of our agents are obviously investigating the current referrals. Our initial plan, is to develop the internal processes of case screening, case assignment. Our primary focus has been on the active unsolved missing and murdered cases where we have jurisdiction. Now we have an analyst that will provide us intelligence support and also responding to new reported cases. So we do have assisted several tribes lately in the acute or new ongoing reports where we may dedicate manpower or resources, whatever the tribe needs. So that's pretty much the scope of the unit right now. We're getting to the point of identifying unreported cases in relation to past UCR data. And what we're trying to figure out is if there's anything that we identify that wasn't unreported. And that's kind of a specific task that we got going on the side. But that's pretty much the scope of where we're at today. And eventually, our goal is when we do have a full staff and we feel comfortable about this program, definitely we always are going to provide technical assistance training to the tribal law enforcement when needed or when requested. And as somebody mentioned earlier too, is try to establish and make sure we're working with the task force across Indian country related to missing and murdered. Thanks.
Thanks, Monty. Appreciate that information about the MMU and the expansion you all are going through it. It's going to be great to see those 20 agents all out in the field here eventually. I want to turn back for a minute to Ernie and Ingrid on the MMIP coordinators and ask sort of a question around the MMIP coordinators. And not all the tribal law enforcement agencies that are on this call may have an MMIP coordinator in their area. So what can a tribal police department do if there isn't an MMIP coordinator in their area?
Ingrid, I'm always going to go with the policy of ladies first. So
I think you're better suited for this question. Go ahead and I'll fill in the blanks.
okay, I had a hard time hearing that, Ingrid, but I'll start out, Matt. And so currently there is 7, I think actually technically 8 MMIP coordinators out there. We're spread throughout the United States. One of the kind of the issues that we ran into is with the election that took place and the kind of the transition of U.S. attorneys, we lost kind of our structure that was approving our various policies and procedures relating to the work that we do outside of our districts or outside of our states. So I unfortunately can't give you a list of kind of all these things that we can do if you're and who you would specifically contact if you're in an area that does not have an MMIP coordinator. Where you would start though is you'd contact tribal, your U.S. Attorney's Office will have a tribal liaison or somebody from that office that represents or is the point of contact for tribes to connect with. And what I would say is to contact that person, the tribal liaison at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that person can ultimately serve as kind of that first point of contact and a facilitator. We've began working with and educating tribal liaisons on what the work that we're doing, and also will assist or consult with tribal liaisons as needed as they work with tribes in their states or districts. So that's kind of where we are right now with that. So again, if you don't have an MMIP coordinator in your state or in your district, the first thing to do is contact your U.S. Attorney's Office, ask who the tribal liaison is, who's serving your district or state. And that office will have somebody who's designated, and you probably already know who that person is and may be working with them. That's kind of the first step. I would say the other thing is continue to promote the MMIP coordinator kind of program initiative. That's the DOJ initiative. I think wherever we've operated, we've gotten really favorable support and reviews from tribal leadership, from tribal communities for the work that we can do with them. Because we're in the middle of administrations right now, our programs are at risk, I think, to be frank. As you know, old administration and new administration figure out what will continue and move forward. So we certainly would encourage you as tribal leaders and tribal law enforcement leaders to promote, promote the continuation of the MMIP program or initiatives moving forward in order to, I think, continue to provide value to your communities in this really important issue.
So I think Ernie captured it exceptionally well, and I would just echo that. The only thing that I would add is, given the audience, I believe that most of you have access to LEAP. And there also is a fair amount of information and resources available to you in Justice Connect. And Ernie, I'm just assuming that this group has access to that. Could you clarify? Am I correct on that?
They sure should. I think most of our participants are chiefs of police or law enforcement leaders and would have access to LEAP. As Ingrid said, that is a tremendous resource. There's all kinds of information and training available through the Operation Lady Justice Connect site, and other, more resources being added every day. So yes, I encourage you to be part of LEAP and participate in that. Matt, you certainly, you or Marcia should be able to add to that.
Yeah, I can jump in there as well. Thanks, Ingrid and Ernie, for bringing up LEAP. That was on my list to add to later, so I can just mention it now. Yeah, we have the community of interest in LEAP and Justice Connect on Operation Lady Justice. So there's a community of interest specifically for OLJ. And within that page, we have actually a couple of the tribal community response plans posted. Due to their law enforcement sensitive nature, we have them within LEAP, but they are available for you or your officers to take a look at. The two that are in there from, I believe, Sault Ste. Marie and Bay Mills Indian Community in Michigan. So those are a couple of resources that you can access via LEAP if you'd like to see a couple of examples of the plans. And Ernie, Ingrid, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the tribes that have developed the plans in your areas, are available for outreach by other tribes if they're interested in viewing what those tribes have developed in your areas as well.
Yes, that's absolutely true. From the tribes that have developed mine, and the other piece that I would mention is the training center, the National Training Center at Department of Justice has done a lot of work to do things to support missing or murdered cases and those sorts of things. So in the symposium for missing or murdered American Indian and Alaska Natives is happening next week and has a pretty extensive MMIP discussion going on in it, as well as the data and those other things. So the tribal liaison, of course, is going to be your first stop in the U.S. Attorney's Office, but those other resources are available too to help build understanding. And certainly in the symposium, at least 3 of the tribes that have participated in this process are going to walk through their experience and how it worked for them as well. So it would help build understanding as well.
Thanks, Ingrid. Good reminder on the symposium next week. And I'll take a minute here after I ask the next question to drop that information in the chat feature for folks as well. So if you haven't registered, I think that deadline is coming up here quickly. I'll pause again here for any questions from our participants before I continue on. So does anyone have any questions for Ingrid, Ernie, or Monty? Go ahead and use the raise your hand feature, or just go ahead and unmute yourself or type in the chat if you prefer that way as well. Folks are quiet today.
This is Chief Begay. I have just a question.
Go ahead, Chief Begay. Appreciate you joining in.
Good afternoon again, everyone. My question is, as far as, it's great to see where we're at and how far we came along as far as Native and Indigenous and being recognized nationally. But I know every tribe has their own hurdles within their own communities and geographic areas. And so I'm just wanting to know if anyone out there, including, other law enforcement that maybe you heard that are not on this call or on this meeting, what their challenges are. I can only speak for my geographic area. We have 75 miles of international border with the country of Mexico. And, we have a lot of border related issues, and to include, making sure that we are very cognizant in getting information on cartel movements and activity in Mexico. And unfortunately, I hate to air out some dirty laundry, but unfortunately we have, tribal members here willing to make a quick buck, whether if it's harboring illegal migrants or narcotics, and they get tied up into that. And unfortunately, a lot of the families that know what their family members are doing, they're very uncooperative. And, and we've always given the approach like, okay, we don't care what they do or what they done, or trying to help you and locate your family, to include trying to collaborate with officials down in Mexico, their law enforcement. And, I'll say it, they're wishy-washy. And so I was just wondering if anybody had other hurdles and within their own respective jurisdiction, because I know Indian country across the United States, it's so different, just kind of like native languages. I'm part of this tribe here at Tono Alton, but trying to decipher the tribes that I'm a part of, Navajo and Tono Alton. There's two different tongues, and it is very difficult. So I can only imagine what other tribes across Indian country, what their hurdles and their diverse areas in their respective areas. So I just have a question if you guys had any questions like that.
Thanks, Chief. Ernie, Ingrid, Monty, and really anyone on the call, if you want to jump in with any of the unique challenges or the challenges that the tribes you have been working with or that you're currently at, for those chiefs on the call, feel free to jump in with any comments that might answer Chief Begay's question.
Hey, Matt, I will emphasize again, as the chief noted here, tribes are so different, and communities and culture and resources and issues are so different. That's why, I began to see quickly that tribal community response plans were the answer, that what tribal leaders and tribal community members had been telling us all along was absolutely true, that a national protocol dropped on a tribe was not going to be effective, that it had to take into account those things that Chief Begay had talked about. Having now been in front of, been through this exercise 7 times in Montana with different tribes, every tribe has been completely different. There's been some common things among the tribes, and one of the common, some of the common things that, we've dealt with in tribal communities has been delayed reporting, has been common everywhere because of a general maybe distrust of law enforcement or lack of confidence in law enforcement, and or you name it, what the reason might be. But it was something that we've seen that's been common to all. What's common to all of Indian country is resource deficiencies, right? every place is under-resourced in terms of people and training and specialized equipment in order to most effectively address missing persons cases. So in each case, understanding that, trying to find those resources nearby or within the community that we could kind of address those gaps. There is another kind of commonality, although the tribes have been very different, is we've seen in Montana a significant problem in missing teens, 17 years and younger who go missing, and they go missing multiple times. And these are ultimately the cases that you see that show up on Dateline and NBC News and other national media because they don't end well after a number of times that this individual goes missing. So, again, these are some common things, but everything is very different. And again, why it's so important that these tribal community response plans are truly about and focused on the specific issues impacting the community. So once again, long-winded kind of response, but I would bet if we kind of pull the issues impacting the chiefs of police representing the tribes here in this call, we're going to find some of the commonalities. In terms of late reporting, that was the one thing with Chief Danke and the groups that participated in our discussion forums. That was that was something that was common nationally with late reporting. But the other kind of important thing was that everybody's problem was a bit different. And even in Montana, where we've, Blackfeet is very different sitting on a border with Canada than the Crow tribe that I'm working with today. Once again, so different and all needing kind of this individual response and consideration.
I'd echo the late reporting. The issues in Alaska are that the tribes respond because there is nobody else to respond, and in a lot of the villages. And so the resources are so small and so far removed often that they're waiting hours to days for law enforcement to get there. And so they respond, and the problem is they often don't call when they're responding. So that immediate support and response that could have been offered remotely and could have started the process to getting law enforcement there doesn't start, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, sometimes for longer. And sometimes it's never reported. We've done regional consultation sessions with 157 tribes now, giving them the opportunity to share. And in each one of those 5 different regions of our 12, they've all told us stories of cases that have just never been reported. The person is still missing. And that's largely because they just haven't built those relationships with law enforcement. They don't have those contacts. They don't trust. There's historical trauma. There are a number of issues. But in addition to that, we're, I'm assuming, all over the United States suffering from meth and the opioid addiction and all of those things happening in our villages and in our communities. And what another problem that has created a challenge and has come up numerous times across our law enforcement and our communities and interacting with law enforcement is the families that are involved are also in crisis. So when these kids are going missing multiple times, those families are in crisis. When the individual goes missing and the family doesn't report for a while, it's because they don't have contact with them because that family's in crisis. And what happens, what we're getting reported to us a fair amount is those families are calling for support, and what they're getting is their case is getting round filed, because they're calling when they're in crisis. They're calling when they're under the influence, and their stories are just too horrific to be believed. And so there's a dispatch disconnect that seems to be happening as far as training and supporting those sort of calls when they come in with dispatch. And that has come up a number of times. So, you know, the positive parts that have come out of that conversation with our law enforcement team members and with our communities is just the real need to build relationships. And wherever possible, we're on a rotating schedule in most of our communities out here that do have law enforcement. So they're rotating in a couple weeks on, a couple weeks off. And you know, that where they used to be many years ago when there was more funding, they used to be in most of those communities attending the birthday parties and attending the New Year's celebration and attending the 4th of July things, and you know, just being present. That those opportunities become less when you get involved in a rotating schedule. And so that has been a big part of the process is how do we build positive relationships with these rotating schedules and getting them into community and school functions with kids. And the other commonality that has come up is victim services has got a ton of funding, and there are a lot of agencies that are developing victim services and a lot of tribes that are developing victim services across the nation and definitely across the tribes in the state of Alaska. And those victim services are on the ground. Where law enforcement is not in some cases, they're immediately on the ground. And so, you know, coordinating and doing some cooperative training to support each other. Victim services is a resource that you know, the community's talked about being able to coordinate and interact and maybe do some cross training with law enforcement as an option. But lots of challenges. Our challenges are mostly distance and lack of resources, and the development of those relationships and substance abuse. So I'll let that go. Thanks.
Matt, may I add just on
Yeah, please go ahead, Monty.
And Ingrid, I mean, I think that's they hit it right on the point. Some of the common factors when screening these type of investigations and these cases, once you start doing it, you really see there's contributing factors to it, like victimology. When you really understand who that victim is, and then you start realizing that, you know, they may have been connected to some type of narcotics or drug activity, and then this, you know, your people of interest are connected as well, or you know, maybe social substance abuse problems in the community, and plus, just like Ingrid said, you know, in a lot of these cases, these juveniles are being raised by their grandparents, and you know, they can't control them. They go out, they get involved in some type of adult activities, and next thing something happens. So very interesting about what's going on, what Mr. Begay said. But I think part of this is also identifying the roots of the causes, is what we've talked about as a group at MMU, is how do we rebuild some of these, you know, families, or make our communities healthier. And for us that grew up in Indian country, you know, a lot of us may have experienced that in our younger days, and now it's difficult to try to you know, bring back healthy communities. So I just wanted to throw that in when you start looking at these MMU cases, that there are a lot of common, you know, factors that you may see, and it all kind of goes back to, you know, there's some factors in place that are common in Indian country. But I appreciate Elton bringing that up, because Tohono O'odham is such a unique reservation, and so complex. But you know, and what we always try to do with our chiefs of police is try to work with our tribal leaders to address those problems that contribute to crime. And I know everybody makes an effort, but like you said, every tribal government's different, every leader's tribe's different. So sometimes it could be a challenge. Thanks.
Thanks, Monty, and Ernie and Ingrid as well. And thanks, Chief Begay, for that question. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left here. I think about 4 minutes according to my clock. So Marcia, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to anyway, and see if you have any comments you'd like to kind of make based on our discussion today, knowing that this is also our last session that we're hosting from the COPS office perspective. So give you a chance to weigh in.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to say thanks so much to Ernie and to Ingrid and to the other MMIP coordinators. The work that they've done with tribes to do these tribal community response plans has just been phenomenal. It was kind of an idea that really has taken off, and we're hopeful that any tribe who is interested will have those draft guides out here fairly soon so that they can take them and either work with their U.S. attorney's offices or do them on their own and put together a plan so that they've got a plan in place in case there's something that's needed. So thanks so much to the tribes who stepped up and were willing to do those pilot projects. And we're just really happy that you guys could all be on this last session. We're hopeful that in some ways we could maybe continue this work. We'll just have to see where it goes in terms of what next steps are. Operation Lady Justice sunsets at the end of November when our second report will be due. And so we don't know at this point kind of where things will head in terms of what the next steps will be under this administration, but we will definitely keep you posted. And if we have additional ability to be able to continue these sessions for things, we'd be very happy to do that.
Thanks, Marcia. Ernie, Ingrid, or Monty, any closing remarks from any of you?
Not for me. I just appreciate everybody that got on, and it's good seeing a lot of the folks again. Good to see Ernie again. We go way back. So, just reach out to us, at MMU. If you have any questions, our goal is to develop relationships with each tribal law enforcement manager and tribal government. So you may be hearing from those agents to start discussing this topic. So appreciate it. Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate you having me. Encourage your tribes to get involved with their tribal community response plans. I think the work is well worth doing. And everything that we heard across all of this process was the building of relationships, and the tribal community response plans really allow that to happen. Building relationships within the community across all the stakeholders and all the providers and law enforcement was just super important. So thank you. If you have any questions, my email's in the chat and you can ask those directly. Thank you.
Matt, I'd like to thank everyone as well. And I know we've got a heavy representation by tribal law enforcement and many chiefs of police. And thanks so much for what you do. I can tell you, having worked, obviously this issue in Montana, but also been heavily involved in the kind of the national discussion. I know that probably your communities and certainly every community I've worked with in Montana has been deeply impacted and affected by MMIP issues of all kinds. Really, as leaders and law enforcement professionals, I think we really have an obligation to go out and really put the time and effort into this in order to ensure that we're most effective when dealing with cases involving missing tribal members or somebody who's been murdered. And certainly I believe strongly that the way to do that is through the tribal community response plan. Again, it's hard work, it's engagement. It takes participation in bringing in individuals from maybe outside your tribal communities, but it's well worth it. And again, I would hope that you take the opportunity to do it, and certainly reach out if you have any questions. As Ingrid had indicated, my email and contact information is in the chat. And I'm happy to assist. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ernie, and thanks also Ingrid and Monty and Marcia as well for an engaging session today. It's really beneficial, I think, to hear how the tribal community response plans were developed and that it was really such a community policing type of effort with community engagement and partnerships among all of the tribal and non-tribal entities in the areas that you all have worked with. So it's great to hear that. And appreciate everyone, all the tribal law enforcement chiefs of police on here and all the work that you do. Appreciate that, and know that the COPS office is committed to assisting you in any way we can. So stay tuned for future efforts from the COPS office and the tribal law enforcement engagement area. And with that, we'll sign off for the day. And thanks again for attending. Appreciate it.